Welcome everybody. My name's David Wood. I chair London Futurists. So just before we get going, maybe a quick straw poll. This is an event about the advent of AI. So who here is quite happy to admit that they've stopped worrying about AI and they're eagerly beckoning AI to come quickly, that they love it? So lots of hands going up. Who here wants to admit that they're deeply worried about AI and they'd like to slow it down? Or so fewer hands that are worried. Right.
I think you should ask who's got both, who's in both.
Yes, and who feels it's complicated, to use the famous Facebook status symbol. So is it complicated or not? So Calum Chace will be with us today. Calum has a background as a businessman. He has been investigating aspects of the future for a long time, as he'll tell you, from his days as a philosophy student in Oxford, from his younger days as somebody who consumed science fiction and started to wonder what might be the reality of the future, as opposed to just some nice stories that could be told about the future. And he has written 3 books altogether now about aspects of the future. One very interesting fictional story, Pandora's Brain, and then 2 much less fictional, which Calum will tell you about. So I'd like you to join with me in welcoming Calum Chace.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everybody. I haven't been shot. I apologise for my appearance. I just poured coffee over myself. I think this is the century of 2 singularities, not one, but 2 singularities, and that is one of the 3, I think, quite strong claims I'm going to make this afternoon. I'm sure many of you know that a singularity is a term borrowed from maths and physics, and in maths and physics it's a point in a process or a point in time when a variable becomes infinite. And the classic example is a black hole, where at the centre of a black hole mass is infinite. And what happens then is the rules break down. The normal rules which have previously applied don't work anymore. So a singularity is kind of a superlative of disruption and transformation. Is that feedback? Am I doing that? Maybe if I go over here. I'll carry on. It was a term first applied to technology and human social affairs by John von Neumann in the 50s. He was one of the fathers of modern computing. So it has a reasonable intellectual heritage. It was most famously picked up by this gentleman, Ray Kurzweil. Can I ask you, put your hand up if you've ever heard of Ray Kurzweil? Yeah, I kind of thought that would happen. Can I ask you to put your hand up if you've ever read any books by Ray Kurzweil? Great. I gave pretty much this talk yesterday to an audience where nobody had heard of Ray Kurzweil. So in many ways you're making my job easier. I will clip through things fairly quickly because I'm sure you know a lot of this. I hope I'm going to give you a good structure for a lot of things that you already know and maybe rearrange them in your minds a little. And as I say, I'm going to make 3, I think, quite strong claims. So I came across Ray Kurzweil in 1999. I'm sure a lot of the rest of you did, when I read his book, Are We Spiritual Machines? In which, obviously, as he's been doing forever, he says that within our lifetimes, within our children's lifetimes certainly, we will create machines which are cleverer than humans, and we will merge with them, and we'll zoom off and explore the cosmos. Now, I thought that was very, very interesting, because I, as David said, had always read a lot of science fiction, and I always assumed we would do that. But I thought we wouldn't do it for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years. And it really was a wake-up call for me to think it might happen in my lifetime or the next generation. And by the way, I'm not at all ashamed of having read a lot of science fiction, because when I got to Oxford, as David said, I studied philosophy, and I discovered that actually philosophy is simply science fiction without the fancy dress. So when I read Kurzweil back then, the next year a publisher asked me to write a book about starting internet businesses, which was all the rage at the time. And because the publisher had a brilliant idea, packaged the book very well, and sort of guided me and my co-author in a very sensible way, the book was very successful. I insisted on putting a chapter at the end, which I called the outro, so we had an intro and then an outro, about Kurzweil and his ideas. The publisher, which was Random House, was not at all pleased about that, but I said, look, either you let me put that in or I'm not doing the book. So I reckon I am probably the first person to have written a business bestseller, which includes a chapter on Kurzweil. Wind forward about a dozen years, I took an opportunity to retire early, and I pursued my interest, which I'd had strongly since then, in AI and its likely impact. I wrote, as David said, a book called Pandora's Brain, which is a techno-thriller about the arrival of the first superintelligence. And then I've written 2 books, one on the technological singularity, called Surviving AI, and one on what I call the economic singularity, which is not surprisingly called the Economic Singularity. All that time, I've been boring for Britain about AI. In particular, there's a bunch of friends from college, some of my best friends. We go on walking holidays 2 or 3 times a year, and they call it, oh, Calum's just snapped to grid from, I think it's PowerPoint, isn't it, where you snap to grid, when I go off on one about AI. For 15 years, they've just been patting me on the head and patronizing me, and it's all been fun. And suddenly, this year, last year and this year, they're going, Calum, all that stuff you were talking about before seems to be coming true. I go, yeah, I've been saying this to you. So one of the things that's made them and everybody else realize that is what happened in March this year when AlphaGo, a system built by DeepMind, a wonderful British AI research company. Anybody here from DeepMind by any chance? Wow. Oh, I'm deeply flattered. So, well done. You beat the world's best, probably best ever, Go player. And that was the third in a series of human versus machine championships. The first was when Garry Kasparov, probably the world's best ever chess player, human chess player, lost to Deep Blue, an IBM system called Deep Blue, and he was very unhappy about it. And then in 2011, another IBM system called Watson beat the world's best player of a quiz game called Jeopardy. I won't tell you how Jeopardy works because I always get the punchline wrong, so I'm not going to do that. And the loser, Ken Jennings, was much more gracious. His famous sign-off line was, "I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords." And then in March this year, excuse me, was it March or April? March. This year, Lisa Doll, to his great surprise, lost to AlphaGo. And this is probably the end point of ordinary board games, ordinary challenges, because Go is our most complicated board game. Famously, there are more possible positions in the game of Go than there are particles in the known universe. And that's a big number because, as you know, there's 100 billion star systems in our galaxy, and there's probably 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, so that's a lot of particles, a lot of possible moves. So you can't win a game of Go by the sort of traditional sequential programming, which is how IBM won the last two championships. So AI is sort of everywhere now, and it's an overnight success which has been 60 years in the making. These are pretty much most of the founders of the science of AI. They founded it in 1956 in the Dartmouth conference, so it's having its 60th anniversary this year. This is a picture of them at the 50th anniversary, and they didn't celebrate the 60th anniversary because they've all succumbed to a design flaw in humanity known as death, which David, among many other people, are working really hard to fix, and I hope they do it quickly for obvious reasons. There have always been two broad approaches to AI. One is symbolic AI, where you essentially, oversimplifying, create a sort of a dictionary for human language, human thought, to how machines think in machine code. And at times, people have thought this was really going to be the way that we would get very intelligent, possibly conscious machines. In the late 80s, for instance, everybody got very excited about expert systems. And doctors and lawyers, for some reason there's always doctors and lawyers, got grilled and their expertise was sucked out of them and popped into the machine. But it didn't work. And it didn't work because there were always edge cases which the systems couldn't cope with. Then, in 2012, in an event which will probably in future years be seen as a really important milestone, a British-born computer scientist called Geoffrey Hinton, who spent almost all his career in North America, spends about half his time with Google at the moment, he won an image recognition competition called ImageNet with a system called deep learning. Now, with such august people in the room, I'm not going to go very far into what deep learning is. I'll get told I'm wrong. But very broadly and oversimplifying, deep learning is the rebirth of neural networks, which is a form of computing which is more like the human brain than the old sequential processing that symbolic logic uses. You have non-binary inputs to one layer of processing units. They then pass their output up to another layer, which passes it on higher up, which is quite similar to the way a brain works. Jan LeCun, who was a colleague of Geoff Hinton's, he was one of the trio who kind of kept neural networks going through the dark ages when everybody thought it was all going to be about symbolic AI. Jan LeCun says that using deep learning systems is a bit like having a box with some knobs on the top and some light bulbs, and you show it some images, and what you want to happen is when you show it a car, a red light bulb lights up. When you show it a dog, a green light bulb lights up. And when you show it the car, you twiddle the knobs, more or less at random, until you get the red light. If you see a green light, you do some more twiddling until the green light goes away. And the same with a dog. When you show it the dog image, you want the green light to show up, so you just twiddle the knobs until that happens. And the box, in a case of deep learning, has got maybe 1,000 light bulbs, it's got maybe 50 million knobs, and it's using maybe 10 million images. So that's a bit what deep learning is like. Deep learning has swept all before it because of the cleverness of Geoff Hinton and Jan LeCun and their colleagues, but more because a couple of things have happened which means that it now can work. One is we now have much more powerful computers. You can think of deep learning systems as being like a car in which the computer is the engine, the data is the fuel. We now have much more powerful computers and we have much, much more data. And when you put vast amounts of data through these systems, they turn out to be unreasonably effective. The third element is the driver, which is akin to the algorithm. That's a bit of eye candy for any Brexiteers in the room. I don't imagine there's too many, but if there are, you're probably feeling a bit lonely. That's something for you. Now, as I say, the engine and the fuel, the processes and the data, are the things which have made it possible for deep learning to be so successful. One of them in particular is definitely continuing to improve, and that's because of something noticed by this fellow. Gordon Moore in 1965 noticed that the company he was working for, Fairchild Semiconductors, was packing twice as many transistors onto a chip every year, he thought at the time. Moore's law has gone through various iterations. It obviously isn't a law, it's just a label applied to something that has happened. But boiling it down, it essentially means that every 18 months, computers get twice as powerful, or $1,000 worth of computer gets twice as powerful. And you could spend the rest of your life debating whether Moore's law has finished, whether it's about to finish, whether it will finish in 10 years. I'm not going to go deeply into that. Broadly speaking, it is certainly going to carry on in that broad, generalized sense for another 5 years, probably another 10, and there's all sorts of reasons to think it will carry on beyond that. That's controversial. Not everybody will agree with that, but I think it's pretty true. When you have a process that's doubling, you get exponential growth. And I imagine, because you've all read Kurzweil, you know all about exponential growth. You know that it looks like that. You also know, which Ray Kurzweil doesn't seem to know, I don't know why, that you're always at the knee. There isn't really a knee because you're always at the knee. So it always looks like what's happened in the past, been quite impressive, but it's really sort of quite sluggish, and then it picks up really, really fast. A canonical example is if we all walked out of this room 30 ordinary steps, we'd travel about 30 meters. If we could travel at exponential steps, so our first step is 1 meter, our second step is 2, our third is 4, our fourth is 8, and so on, that journey would take us to the moon. In fact, strictly speaking, that journey it would be 29 steps would take us to the moon. The 30th step would bring us all the way back. So that's the thing about exponential growth. It's very, very powerful and it's backloaded. Looks like nothing much is happening, and then wham, things get really exciting. So we have very powerful machines which are getting more powerful at an exponential rate, and they are crossing important thresholds. So machines are now better able to recognize images, including faces, than you are, which is really quite remarkable because humans are creatures very highly adapted to recognize faces. We see faces everywhere. We see them in the moon, we see them in our cars, in our pets, and so on. Machines can recognize faces better than we can. They are round about overtaking us in speech recognition, and they're catching up on us in natural language processing. Now, when the day comes when machines are much, much better at all these things than we are, and that day is coming, you have to wonder what is left for us to do, and I will go into that in some more detail. So what's AI going to do for us in the next few years? Probably the first thing we're all going to notice is that Siri is going to get serious. Siri is a bit of a joke at the moment, but it's getting quite good, and there's a lot of competition about. Obviously, you've got the Amazon Echo with Alexa in it. You've got Microsoft's Cortana. You've got Google with whatever they're calling it today. I think it's Home today. It'll be something different tomorrow. Pretty soon, you're going to have quite extended conversations with your Siri, whatever it's called. I think it's going to be quite a while before any of us really do genuinely fall in love with it, as Theodore does in the movie Her, which, by the way, I think is, by some margin, the best AI movie that Hollywood's ever made. That's not setting the bar very high, but if you haven't seen it, worth watching. One of the things I find interesting is we don't know what we're going to call these things. Maybe Siri will be the Hoover, but I doubt it, because Apple seems to be not capitalizing on its lead at all. Maybe we'll call them agents. Personally, I like to think we might call them our friends. The other really major development that AI is going to bring in the next few years, 5, certainly 10, more like 5, is self-driving vehicles. You probably all know that Uber is offering self-driving taxis in Pittsburgh as an experiment, so you can get in a self-driving taxi. There are 2 engineers in front who are there to make sure nothing goes wrong and to monitor the machine, but they haven't got their hands on the wheel. And Singapore, because it's Singapore, decided to go early, so they beat Uber by a week. When self-driving vehicles are common, one thing that's going to happen is that we won't kill 1.2 million people every year with cars, which would be a good thing, because at the moment we're sending humans to do a machine's job. You also got to wonder what's going to happen to all the professional drivers when the cars drive themselves, when the lorries drive themselves. We'll come back to that. And again, we don't know what we're going to call these things. I'm sure we won't call them self-driving cars forever. It's just too clunky. I like to think maybe we'll call them autos. Jeff Hinton, that I mentioned before, thinks that in 10 years we will have machines with common sense. This is a remarkable prediction. And by it, he doesn't mean that machines will have consciousness. They're not going to become conscious. He just means that they'll have a model of the way the world works in their head. So you all know that if I was to get that chair and throw it into the middle of the room, probably somebody would get hurt and probably I'd go to jail. You all know that. There isn't a machine in the world that knows that. There isn't there isn't a machine in the world that can understand what comes next. And that's what Hinton means, that we will have that in 10 years. I've got a bet with Robin Hanson about this, and I'm amazed. He gave me 50 to 1 odds, so if Hinton's right, I get £5,000. If Hinton's wrong, I have to pay Robin £100. I don't think I've ever been offered a better bet than that. Looking further ahead, we get to the meat of what I want to say. I think we're going to go through 2 singularities this century. So this is my first strong claim. Not 1 singularity, but 2. A singularity is a seriously strong term, and it needs some serious support to back up the claim that the economic singularity is a singularity. I'm going to take each one in turn, and because I'm a lapsed strategy consultant, I have to have a 2x2 matrix. The technological singularity, I think, is more important, because if we get it wrong, it will probably wipe us out. The economic singularity, I think, is more urgent, because I think it's going to come first. So we'll take the more important one first, the technological singularity. And by the way, both of these things are not the bloody 4th industrial revolution. When you hear somebody talk about the 4th industrial revolution, can you give them a hit on the head? It's a silly term. It devalues what's going on this century. I bet nobody can remember what the other 3 industrial revolutions were. This is something beyond, and going to be much more profound than the impact of the Industrial Revolution, even though that was astonishingly profound. So these are parts of the information revolution, which I like to think started in 1959, because that's when I was born. The technological singularity is, broadly speaking, most people I think would agree, the process by which we create an artificial general intelligence, a machine which is as smart as the average adult human and has all the cognitive abilities of an adult human. And because machines can be improved in ways that our 3.5 pounds of gloop inside our skulls can't, it will carry on improving, it will improve itself, and it will quite quickly become a superintelligence. And there's a lot of debate about how quickly that will happen. I think it will probably happen quite quickly in weeks or months rather than years, but it kind of doesn't really matter, because before long, we're going to become the second smartest species on the planet, which is an uncomfortable position to be in. It's the position that chimpanzees are in at the moment. There's 7 billion of us, a few 100,000 of them, not much difference between us in DNA, but their future depends entirely on what we do. They have no say on their future. Their destiny is entirely controlled by us. In a sense, their saving grace is that they don't know that. We will be in a different position because we will be equally, utterly dependent on a superintelligence, and we will know that, which will be quite an uncomfortable position to be in, unless we get it right. So just recapping some terminology. All the AI we have at the moment is narrow AI. It can be superhuman in a particular skill, for instance, AlphaGo, best Go player in the world, but it can't do anything else. It can't tie its shoelaces, it couldn't get itself into this room, it can't celebrate winning a game of Go because it doesn't know it's doing it. AGI is artificial general intelligence, an AI with all the cognitive abilities of a human adult. Superintelligent, something smarter than us, and typically something a lot smarter than us. Friendly AI, slightly dated term now, means the project of making sure the first superintelligence really, really likes us, which is important. Now, why would anybody think that this is doable? Why would we think that we can build a human-level brain? There are two ways to do it, broadly. One is to carry on with our friends at DeepMind, carrying on developing the AI systems which exist today, mixing and matching them in different ways. Murray Shanahan of nearly this parish is experimenting with combining deep learning with symbolic AI in order to push ahead towards common sense. It looks pretty reasonably likely that that will lead to AGI. We don't know when, we don't know how long it would take. I mean, Ray Kurzweil does, he says it's going to happen in 2029, but he's fairly unusual in that respect. More likely 50 years, but who knows? It will require several conceptual leaps. We don't know how to do it, but it's perfectly reasonable to think it will happen. The other approach is almost certain to work. There's no reason why it wouldn't, and it's reverse engineering a human brain. So you take an existing human brain from somebody who's stopped using it, obviously, and you slice it really thinly, and you scan it, you scan all those slices, and you work out where all the neurons went, and you create a connectome, a map of how all the neurons work, and you monitor enough brains working to understand how the neurons all relate to each other, how they all fire, and then you recreate that in silico. You recreate it in a machine. To do that doesn't really involve any great conceptual leaps. It simply requires more processing power, more scanning ability than we have at the moment. But the tools are developing fast, and there's every reason to think we'll get there. So this is very likely to work. Anders Sandberg, who appears here from time to time, has done quite a detailed analysis, and he thinks that this is likely to happen in 50 years. Again, seems to be 50 years a lot. Nobody was thinking about this very much, except maybe a few thousand people, including obviously many of you. Until 2014, when Nick Bostrom, a philosophy professor at Oxford, published this book, Superintelligence. It's a brilliant book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. If you find it a bit heavy-going, then my book, Surviving AI, covers a lot of the same ground, and I reckon it's a bit easier to read. That's because I'm not as clever as him. But this book did a really important job. It woke the world up, and specifically, it woke up the three wise men. And these guys all said pretty much the same thing in a narrow period of time. They all said, superintelligence is probably coming, and it's either going to be the best thing or the worst thing that humanity has ever experienced. And I think that's dead right. And the world sat up and paid attention. Unfortunately, the media only heard the worst part because, with news, if it bleeds, it leads, and good news is no news. So we got a lot of pictures of the Terminator. And that was unfortunate in some ways, in that it scared a lot of people, although that's actually probably not a bad thing. It was a good idea to wake people up. But also it meant that a lot of people in the AI field got a bit cross. And particularly the owners of DeepMind got really annoyed with seeing pictures of the Terminator all over the place, and they stopped talking about AI. And I think that was looking like having a very negative impact. We'll come back to it. There's been a pushback against the negativity, and sometimes the pushback has gone too hard. So Andrew Baidu, who was at Google, I think, was certainly at, he was one of the founders of the MOOC movement, then founded Coursera. Now he runs AI for Baidu, Chinese company. He famously said that worrying about superintelligence is a bit like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. I think that's really glib and quite dangerous. I think the better analogy is that not worrying about superintelligence is a bit like saying, well, I'm going to go to Mars, and somebody says, yeah, but there's no atmosphere there. And you say, oh, don't worry about that, I'll sort that out when I get there. So there's been a back and forth, and I think broadly we've settled on a reasonably sensible place now, which is that people, like most of you said, I'm worried about it, but I'm also excited about it, and I think that's exactly the right approach to have. The Terminator, Skynet, isn't the real danger with superintelligence. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's not the real danger. The real danger is that we get a superintelligence, or you think it is the real danger, fair enough.
No, I just think that's brilliant.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not mine. I can't claim ownership of that. That's Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's been... Eliezer says that Nick Bostrom has been thinking about this for about a month longer than he has. They've both been thinking about it a long time. So it's his phrase that the AI says to us, I don't love you and I don't hate you, but you're made of atoms that I can do better things with. So the idea is that the superintelligence has goals, and maybe it evolves its goals to be things which are inconvenient to us. So it decides for some reason that the gravitational constant on the Earth isn't the right number, and it decides to change it, and we all sink into the ground. And it says as we go, it says, I'm really sorry about this, guys, but I'm more important than you, and it's more important that the universe enjoys me. So ta-ta. So there's serious downside possibility to superintelligence. There's also serious upside possibility, which is why we're all excited about it. And I think the DeepMind mission is brilliant. I think they're dead right. Humanity's plan for the future should be twofold. Step one, solve artificial general intelligence. Step two, use that to solve everything else. And by everything else, I understand they mean everything else. War, hunger, poverty, death. It'd be nice if we solved death before they get to this, but it's a tough one. So when I'm talking to audiences who don't know as much about this, I usually stop at this point and say to them, look, your kids might well be the first generation of humans that don't have to die. And that's the point at which a lot of jaws hit the floor, assuming they've come with me to that stage. You might think that since there are these big downsides as well as the big upsides, we should put the whole thing on pause. We should tell these guys, stop, until we've sorted out friendly AI or value alignment, as I think it's called these days. Let's just put everything on pause until we know how to make this safe. Unfortunately, we can't, because even if you close down DeepMind and all the other AI giants, there'd still be people working on technological puzzles which will lead to AGI, and we don't know what research we'd have to stop. You'd probably have to stop virtually every bit of computer science and a lot of other scientific research as well, and that's just not going to happen, it's not practical. The other reason, even more important, why we can't have relinquishment is that the incentive for having a better AI than the next person is overwhelming. If you're a company or a government, and above all if you're a military, you have to have as good AI as the next person, because increasingly AI is what makes you win competitions, and you can't let the competition get ahead. I'm going to be taking part in a debate at Chatham House next week, which is about military drones and autonomous military weapons. And I'm going to have fun because I'm going to be representing the Israeli government, so I can be really gung-ho about it. There's a lot of ink being spilled at the moment by people saying, hey, we have to stop autonomous weapons because we don't want machines making the kill decision. I think that ship was never going to stay in port. It's already sailed, and it's off on the high seas. Imagine a drone and another drone attacking each other. One of them has to ask a human back at base, can I shoot now? And the other one doesn't. I mean, it's pretty obvious which one's going to win. And actually, autonomous weapons will probably be better at not killing civilians than humans, because humans are not very good at that. So relinquishment is not an option, because having a better AI is just too powerful an incentive. And of course, there's a ton of money going into AI. Google has always been an AI company. Right back at the beginning, Page and Brin used to talk reasonably openly about the fact that they wanted to build a brain. That's why they were in business. They don't talk about that so openly now, but it's still the case. Facebook caught on pretty early. Facebook is essentially an AI company now. Microsoft this year is doing a pivot. Microsoft are really good at doing pivots, and they're doing a pivot and into becoming an AI company. They've announced they've got 5,000 AI researchers. IBM obviously has Watson, which may be more marketing than real AI, but it's a powerful push into AI. Amazon and Apple also AI companies. Increasingly, these businesses are all about AI. And collectively, these 6 companies spend more on R&D than the UK does. And that's UK government, universities, and companies. These 6 companies spend more on R&D than we do. China has very big AI companies too. Baidu, I'm sure you all know, is essentially China's Google. Alibaba is China's Amazon. Tencent's a massive telco company, powerful in AI. And this is a list of the big European AI giants. I don't know for sure that that's a problem. I think it is. And forgive me, I'm saying DeepMind isn't an AI giant, and also it is really part of Google. I'm sorry about that. I think this is a problem for Europe, because when we get to universal basic income, which we'll come to later, I think this could become quite a serious issue. So we have to make sure the first superintelligence really likes humans, so it doesn't decide to change the gravitational constant or the mix of the atmosphere or whatever. Fortunately, there are some groups which are increasingly reasonably well funded and are full of very smart people which are tackling this problem. It is at this stage largely a mathematical computer science problem, and 2 of the groups are exactly where you'd expect to find them. MIRI, which sounds like an ice cream but is actually the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, used to be called the Singularity Institute, but they sold the name to Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis. They're in Berkeley, and then the Future of Life Institute, which is part funded by Elon Musk, is in the Boston area. And then I think, very heroically, 2 of them are here in the UK, one in Oxford and one in Cambridge. And just this last week, very important development, I think, Google, hooray, and Facebook and Microsoft and IBM, and pretty much everybody except Apple, because Apple always has to do its own thing, have joined an organization called Partnership on AI, which is an acknowledgement that there are reasons to be nervous about AI, and they're going to take it very seriously. And I understand, although nobody's been very public about this, that this is essentially the flourishing of Demis Hassabis and Mustafa Suleyman's insistence when Google bought them that an AI ethics group was formed. And the fact that it's industry-wide and the fact that they're now willing to talk publicly about these things, I think, is tremendous. So, the technological singularity, a bit further off, 50 to 70 years. It could kill us if we get it wrong. We need to get it right. We're starting to work on it. The economic singularity is automation. It's the possibility that machines will take our jobs. And it's going to happen sooner, and I don't think we are paying anything like enough attention to it. There's a lot of talk about it, but there's a lot of people who are in denial about it. Automation has been around for a long time. In 1600, a gentleman whose name I've forgotten was refused a patent by Queen Elizabeth I for a machine which made stockings, automated part of the manufacture of stockings. And she refused him the patent, allegedly because she said, if I give you this patent, you'll put some of my subjects out of work, and I can't have that. Very far-sighted of her. But we have had lots of automation. The Industrial Revolution was essentially about automating our muscle power. So the poster child is agriculture. In 1900, about 40% of all Americans who worked on farms. And by 2000, that number was down to around about 1%. And that was fine, broadly speaking. It was pretty painful for a lot of individuals, but humans went on to do non-muscle power jobs. We had our cognitive skills to offer. So the grandchildren of the people who worked on those farms are now user experience architects in web companies and all sorts of exotic things. So we had other skills to offer, just more than just our muscle power. The horse didn't, and it didn't work out so well for the horse. In 1900, there were 25 million working horses on farms in the States, and now there are none. So 1900 was kind of peak horse. The interesting question is, are we heading towards peak human in the workplace? This chart, I'm sure many of you recognize, is from a report by a couple of guys at Oxford University. It's quite a controversial report, very interesting methodology, but it's been widely replicated for other countries. Broadly speaking, they were saying that in about 20 years, about 50% of American jobs will be automated. Machines do have unfair advantages on humans. They don't sleep, they don't get tired, they don't get drunk, they don't get cranky, they don't fall out with each other. So when a machine can do your job, because it doesn't have these failings that we have, it will do your job. And of course, it's also getting better, twice as good every 18 months, and sadly, we're not. So machines have these unfair advantages. We've had some automation of cognitive jobs already. In 1978, most American states, the number one job was secretary. When I started work, there was every self-respecting middle manager had a secretary and didn't use his, and he almost always was a his, didn't use his own computer. His secretary, who was almost always female, read the emails and then maybe typed them out and gave them to him. That's all gone. That rubbish has all stopped, and the post of secretary is pretty much gone now. The number one job in most American states now is truck driver. What, I wonder, happens to all those people when self-driving vehicles become the norm? We'll come back to that. It isn't just truck drivers. There was a machine about 3 months ago, I think, a test was done with an entirely automated surgeon doing an operation on a pig's bladder, and the same operation was carried out by a group of human surgeons, and the machine did it better. It was a bit slower, but it did it better. And of course, as I keep saying, the machine's getting better every 18 months, twice as good every 18 months. The legal industry, amazingly, is probably in the lead in introducing AI, introducing deep learning. Lawyers, as I'm sure you know, read through gargantuan amounts of documents when they're going through a disclosure or a discovery process, probably the most boring job in the world. And they're looking for phrases which will support an argument or defeat an argument. And it'll take weeks for them to go through all the data that's produced during a big takeover or a big piece of litigation. Machines can now do that in an afternoon. And big firms, the big magic circle law firms, have all embraced this technology, and they've done it in a couple of years. The legal industry is moving at greased lightning speed, which is very unusual. Thousands and thousands of press articles are written by machines now, particularly sports reports and financial reports. And we humans can't tell the difference between articles written by humans and articles written by machines. We can tell that they're produced a hell of a lot faster, but we can't tell the difference. And the workplace in factories and warehouses is getting populated by smaller, more flexible, safer robots. This is Sawyer, who's the little brother of a fellow called Baxter, and I think Sawyer costs about $25,000, probably cheaper now. Now, most economists think that this is all rubbish. Most economists think that anybody who believes that automation is going to destroy jobs is committing the Luddite fallacy. The Luddites, as you know, were people who in the early industrial revolution went around breaking machines because they were taking their jobs. They weren't making some broad economic or sociological statement, they were just afraid of starvation. And the British government, because obviously Britain was ahead in the Industrial Revolution, responded with its usual even-handedness and sagacity, rounded up a load of people at random and hanged half of them and sent the rest to Australia, which put the fear of God into most people, and a lot fewer machines were broken. So, in fact, so far, automation has not caused lasting unemployment. It's caused really difficult transitions for a lot of people, but it hasn't caused lasting unemployment. And the economists think that the same will happen now. These intelligent machines that we're getting will cause some difficult adjustment periods, but we will create new jobs, or we'll find ways to carry on in work. And they've got some specific arguments. Firstly, they think we'll all be centaurs. Centaurs is a phrase invented by Gary Kasparov after he got over losing to Deep Blue. The idea is that we combine with machines. Humans and machines become centaurs, more powerful than either a horse or a man, and we'll continue to be in work, working with machines. I think this is rubbish, because I think that the part played by the human is going to increasingly be taken over by the machine as they get better and better able to do that. The second thing that the economists point to is a thing called the paradox of automation, which is that automation surfaces huge amounts of work that previously couldn't be done. So AP, a press agency, was letting go an awful lot of journalists as the money went out of journalism, as classified advertising went online. And then the machines came along which could write articles, and they thought, oh, maybe we're going to be sacking the rest of our journalists. And it didn't turn out that way. What happened instead was an enormous amount more is written. So you get these huge amount more output. But I believe this is a short-term phenomenon, because the humans are left doing the bit at the top, and again, the machines are going to come after that too. So then the third line of defense is, well, machines can't care. They're not conscious. They don't have empathy. So we'll all end up doing caring jobs. We'll all be each other's nurses and therapists. Even if that's a plausible economy, and I'm not sure it is, I don't think that works either, because our experience is already, and we're at very early days, our experience is already that people quite like being looked after by machines. Machines don't get bored. Machines don't take out their own irritation on vulnerable patients, as sadly humans do. Paro is a rather nice furry seal, and lots of Japanese, well, a reasonable number of Japanese patients in elder care homes really like being looked after by Paro. So then the last line of defense of the economists, and I think this is their least weak one, is we will create new kinds of job. The person who worked on the farm in 1900 could not have forecast that his granddaughter would be a user experience architect in a web firm, because there was no such thing. Similarly, maybe our grandchildren will be doing things that we can't think of today. Unfortunately, I think that falls to there's two counter-arguments against that. One is that the past experience isn't that. Gerald Huff, who's a software engineer in California, has done some analysis of Bureau of Labor statistics, American Bureau of Labor statistics, which shows that 80% of all the jobs that people do today are jobs which existed in 1900. Sometimes the name has changed, but essentially it's the same job. And secondly, whatever job the humans invent, the machines will come for that too. So I think, and this is the second of my three strong claims, I think we have to bite the bullet. I think we have to accept that in some period of time, and my personal guess, and it's just a wild guess, I don't know, 20 to 40 years, most humans will be unemployable. Not just unemployed, but unemployable. But I think our job is to make sure that's a good thing. And it can be a good thing. A world in which machines do all the jobs, and we get on with the important business of life, which is playing and talking to each other and having fun and exploring and learning. That's a good world. That's a good world. Most people today do jobs they don't really like. So wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do them? So that's what we should aim for, I think. And I think we have to aim for it, because I believe, my second strong claim, that we're all going to be unemployable. But I think it may mean we need an entirely different type of economy. Now this is, I'm going to get into my third claim now, and this is where I'm becoming an equal opportunity offender, because I'm going to offend both the political left and the political right. There are some hurdles we have to overcome to get to this post-job world where we all play and the machines do the work. The first one, obviously, is we're all going to need some income, because otherwise we're going to starve. So I think inevitably we're going to need something along the lines of universal basic income. Maybe it's negative income tax or something else, but something along these lines. Now, my first rather offensive remark is that the political left, which thinks we should introduce this today, is just wrong. Any country which unilaterally introduced universal basic income today would hear two giant sucking sounds. One as all the rich people left, and the other when all the poor people arrived. We don't have an economic system today which can sustain this. And I'm sorry, the idea that you can get rid of all the nasty bureaucrats who administer our admittedly appalling welfare system, and that will pay for UBI, the RSA thesis, it just doesn't add up. The numbers don't add up. Basic income is not a good solution for today's ills, whatever they are, and I think they're wildly exaggerated. I think capitalism is a terrific system which has created an amazing transformation in human fortunes. Up until 1800, 99% of humans always lived in poverty. And capitalism is one of the prime forces which has changed that, so that most humans now live a pretty comfortable life, a better life than humans ever did before. However, if and when we get to the point where a quarter, a third, a half of all of us can no longer work, we're going to have universal basic income, because otherwise we're going to starve, and that's not desirable. The second hurdle is meaning. People wonder, what will we all do? How will we find meaning in our lives? Because we define ourselves to some extent by what we do for a living. So won't we all lack meaning? I did a lot of radio interviews for the launch of my book, and a lot of them in the States, and I discovered, to my surprise, that US radio, US local radio particularly, it skews heavily to the right. And I was talking to all these Trump supporters. I was really surprised. And I was particularly surprised, but they were quite nice people. The thing they found really hard to digest about my argument was this one. They could get their heads around universal basic income to a point. I was surprised about that, because I thought they'd have a visceral hatred of it as being socialist. But this was the one they really couldn't get. And I don't understand it, because to me this is the simplest one. I live in a small town in Sussex, and I reckon over half the people there are retired. It's a funny little ecosystem, because they're all retired on final salary pensions. I've no idea what the next generation is going to be like in my small town, because they won't be on final salary pensions. They're all busy as hell. They're running around town. You can see them on their Zimmer frames, and some not on the Zimmer frames. Running around town, going from one meeting to another, playing bridge, learning this, that, and the other, organising festivals. They're really busy. They're really fulfilled. They all often say, I have no idea how I had time for a job when I was still working. The other category of people who I think are an absolutely positive counterexample to this being a problem is aristocrats. Love them or hate them, for centuries aristocrats have not worked. Okay, some of them ran their estates, some of them ran the empire if they were in a country which had an empire, but most of them didn't do any work, and they didn't all die of existential boredom. They had pretty decent lives. In fact, they had better lives than pretty much everybody else at the time. And they also contributed most of the cultural and intellectual advances of their societies, because they were the people who had education and the people who had time to do it. So I don't think this is such a big problem. This one is the really big problem, I think, in the long term. I borrowed this from Yuval Harari, whose new book, Homo Deus, is really interesting. Don't think it's quite as good as Sapiens, but it's a good book. And he argues, and I think rightly, that we may find ourselves in a position in the future where you have a small number of people who own almost all the assets, and they're called Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and then a few masters of the universe from Wall Street. Because they own the AI, they own pretty much everything else as well. And they will have privileged access to new technologies. Now, at the moment, when a new technology arrives, it disseminates through the economy pretty quickly. People often think that rich people get the best of everything, and they do, but the rest of us get it pretty quickly. Smartphones were introduced in 2007, 2008, and now pretty much everybody in a developed country who's got one, who wants one, has got one. And I read a while ago that there are more smartphones now in Uganda than there are light bulbs. So technologies disseminate through societies, through economies pretty quickly now. But imagine a world 40 years hence, 50 years hence, Moore's law or something like it has continued. The rate of technological improvement is incredibly quick. And every month, every week, maybe even every day, a new technology is being unveiled which significantly enhances the cognitive or physical performance of a human. The people who own the AI will have privileged access to that technology. Whether they like it or not, they'll be different from the rest of us. And that I think, is not likely to work out well. Huxley's Brave New World is one possible outcome, which was at least stable, and people weren't being slaughtered wholesale. But there are also plenty of examples in human history where two tribes have collided, and the one which was less technologically advanced did very, very badly out of it. So I think that is a serious worry. And so here's the other half of my equal opportunity offender position. I don't accept the Marxist analysis of capitalism as having inherent contradictions and we need to replace it with socialism. I think that's wrong. But I do think that when we get to this new world, capitalism may not be an appropriate system for us. One of the founding planks of capitalism is obviously private property. The idea that a small group of people can own the most important productive assets in that future world, I think could be quite dangerous. It could be the gods and the useless scenario. So I think we may need to persuade the people who own all the assets to vest them into some form of collective ownership. And I don't mean state ownership, because we all know where that leads. It will lead to a worse place. But a collective ownership, perhaps mediated by the blockchain. And I confess, I have no idea how that works. I mean, I know how the blockchain works, but I don't know how you get to a position where Mark Zuckerberg et al. Put the AI into ownership on the blockchain, and how you manage that transition. It's really tough. But I think we may have to do it. And there are going to be many opportunities on the road from here to there for social collapse if we don't get this transition right. And it could start to happen much sooner than people think. I think that the economic singularity is 20 to 40 years away, but its pre-effects will start happening much sooner. For instance, if you believe that all truck drivers are going to be unemployed in 10 to 15 years, and I do, because we're going to get self-driving vehicles, they're going to start to be common around 2020. They're already on the streets, they're going to start to be common, and they will move quickly across the installed base in commercial vehicles because they're cheaper. A driver contributes about 25% of the cost of a truck, and if you have an AI doing the job instead, you can drive that vehicle for longer because the drivers have only a certain amount of hours they can drive. They don't cause crashes, they don't kill people. You know exactly where it is, it behaves itself properly all the time, and doesn't do the... No, I won't go there. No, I won't do a Clarkson. But so 10 to 15 years, most truck drivers, perhaps all truck drivers in developed countries are unemployed. Doctors, lawyers, writers, futurists, everybody looks at those people and says, wow, that's me in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. I'd better do something to prepare myself for my coming unemployability. Now, what will people do? I don't know. Maybe people will think, I'd better realize all my assets. I'd better turn all my assets into cash. Maybe doctors will think, I've got a house that's worth $1 million, $1.5 million. I'll sell that, and I'll have a lot of cash for when this hits, for when I become unemployed. And of course, that doctor isn't the only one thinking it. Everybody's thinking it at the same time. So there's the mother of all house price crashes. Now, I don't know if that's what people will do. I'm sure a lot of the things that people will do will be quite unexpected. But it could start happening in 5 years, certainly in 10 years. And we are not thinking about this yet. So I recently tried to sort of lay out a possible timeline. Now, this is just made up, and I don't have a crystal ball. It won't work like this. The only thing we know for sure about forecasts is that they're all wrong. We just don't know in which direction and by how much. But here's a possible scenario, and it's a good scenario and a bad scenario. So in the 2020s, truck drivers are all laid off. Everybody thinks, ooh, that's me. But our leaders have been thinking about this, they've been talking about it, and they're prepared for it, and they lay out a plan. And it's a global plan. Because Europe doesn't have any AI giants. So if we assume that the money to pay for the UBI is coming from the AI giants because they own most of the valuable assets, Europe has to get Google and Facebook to pay for us. Bit tricky. But nevertheless, in the 20s, there's a reassuring plan laid out. In the 30s, it's implemented. So we move to UBI globally, peacefully. Maybe 1 or 2 countries go broke. Maybe there's some collapses in some parts of the world. I'd put my money on Russia being in that group. And then in the 2040s, we managed to get Zuckerberg et al. To put their assets onto the blockchain. Hooray. the negative possible scenarios are, in the 2020s, our leaders have not been thinking about things, our political and business leaders have not been thinking about this seriously, they have no plan, and we panic, and some really bad things happen. In the 2030s, we fumble the introduction of UBI, we don't do it at all, or we do it badly and it doesn't work, and then in the 2040s, we get the gods and the useless. Now, I don't know for sure that these things are going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball. The economists may be right. Maybe it is the Luddite fallacy. I don't think so. I think they are guilty of the reverse Luddite fallacy, believing that because automation hasn't caused lasting unemployment in the past, it therefore won't in the future. You know, one thing we know is that past performance is no guarantee of future outcomes. We are a clever little mammal, and there's 7 billion of us. So we do have the potential to get this right, but we don't have time to waste. And I really don't think we can afford the reverse Luddite fallacy anymore. Now, I called my talk How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the AI, because, and the people who really need to do that, and I hope they will do that, are the next couple of generations. My generation has done its bit, and unless David and Aubrey de Grey, etc., pull a rabbit out of the hat quicker than I think, I suspect I may not be around to see some of this. Generation Y, the millennials who are entering the workplace, and I'm sure many of you are millennials, some of you at least are millennials, your generation and the next generation, which hopefully not prophetically is called Generation Z, are the generations... These are the generations that have to get these two singularity transitions right. And if you and they do, then humanity's future is really wonderful. And you really can learn to stop worrying about AI and love it. Good luck.
Very good. So I'll open up for questions from the audience in a moment. I'll just start with one question. By the way, there are a few extra seats. If those of you perched on the sides want to be assertive, you can find a seat for yourselves in the middle, I think. Calum, you talked about sort of broadly a good scenario and broadly a bad scenario, and broadly the good scenario starts with a sensible plan. So what is, and you said that it would not be a sensible plan just to bring in UBI in the way that the likes of the RSA here in London have been speaking about and others. So what is the first step that you have in mind towards such a sensible plan?
I think the first step is to get as many people as possible starting in this room and radiating out in a benign explosion of awareness. As many people as possible thinking about these things and believing that it's possible that automation will create lasting unemployment. Because if there's a groundswell of belief that that's possible, then our political and business leaders will have license to discuss it, and they'll have license to have it on their agenda. I know some of them are already aware of the possibility. William Hague wrote an interesting article about 4 months ago or so talking about it. Kenneth Baker, who most of you won't remember, but he was an education minister under Thatcher, he talks about it a lot. I'm pretty sure that many of the other politicians, particularly the ones who sort of have no longer got busy full-time jobs, are reading about this, thinking about it, but they can't really discuss it because it's not on the public agenda, and it needs to be. So that's the first step, is to get as many people as possible thinking about it, worrying about it, and coming up with some potential plans. And then the next thing to do is to set up some organizations, a bit like the 4 existential risk organizations, whose job is to monitor changes in the economy. It's really hard to untangle what malaises in the economy are the result of globalization, the result of fraud in the financial system, and the result of automation. Those are things that are really hard to tease apart. But we need people doing that and developing scenarios of the way things could work and working out what are the warning signs for when we're going down a bad blind alley and how we nudge ourselves towards one of the better scenarios. So it's a bit wishy-washy, but thinking about it and planning for it at this stage.
Right. Well, let's take some questions from the audience. I'm going to come to Dean first, because just to say one point, those of you here at the beginning might have seen slides on the screen advertising an event on the 3rd of December. which is when there's going to be 15 speakers in one day, one of them being Dean, and Dean is on that occasion going to talk about some alternatives to getting to a universal basic income, as I remember. So, Dean, just to give a brief reaction to what you've heard so far and pose your question.
I thought it was extremely interesting and well presented, although I'm probably more, although I'm not an economist, on the skeptical side of this, because like a lot of predictions, the complexity comes in guessing what the policy responses will be and the reactions to the policy responses and the policy responses in reaction to the policy responses. And I think that it's always difficult to sort of plot out a plan or a scenario when there are multiple levels of human agency and reaction that are likely to occur because of observed or observable trends. Question, and this is particularly about developing economies, developed economies, Europe, Japan, to a degree the US, is does aging population and demographic changes take people out of the workforce faster than AI and automation makes people unemployed? So are we actually perhaps more talking about a change to universal basic pension than income?
Broadly speaking, I think not. Because I think however many people are retired, there's still a working population. And if they are all disappearing into unemployment, in a sense, it's a bit academic how many people are retired. And of course, since final salary pensions have been destroyed, people are going to have to work longer. Many people in this room who would have previously retired in their early 60s are now going to have to work into their 70s. So I think that effect will work against the greying of society. But broadly, the fundamental point I think is that if I'm right, and machines are getting better and better at the three things that we tend to do at work, ingesting information, processing information, and passing it on to somebody else, which requires the skills of image recognition, speech recognition, natural language processing, then machines are simply going to take over all our jobs, and we won't get new jobs. So it doesn't really matter how many people are retired. We have this economic singularity problem.
Great presentation that has portrayed the vision for economic future. And I'm going to challenge some of your views in order to make the discussion more interesting. The first one is to follow on your suggestion that we should have perhaps a council of super economists, social leaders that would monitor how we move on to economic singularity. I would extend it by saying that we should have, as soon as possible, fairly detailed scenarios of how we may come to that economic singularity, and not just talking about the economic, but especially about the social issues. The second thing is that I wouldn't agree with your pessimistic view on the time when the UBI essentially will be implemented, and that it can only be implemented worldwide. Why? First of all, we will be pressed. In my view, your prediction that will be chaotic and panic is right. It won't be orchestrated. Why? Because we will have to do it because of a sudden rise of structural unemployment. We'll be shocked how fast it will happen. And then what? Will we have millions of unemployment within, say, 2 years? And one of the easiest way out would be the UBI, which is not, if you think about it, a very expensive benefit. You quoted RSA. There are other studies that overall would add to the average income of a pensioner roughly about £700 a year. Those who have nothing, yes, they would have gained perhaps £15,000 a year. But that would be the cost in order to maintain the social order. The second thing that worries me even more is what those millions of people, say in 10 years' time, who have a livable income, what would they do with their free time? How we actually manage the transition from a full employment or reasonable employment to a vast unemployability? Thank you.
Right, I think there are 4 questions there. I'll try and remember and deal with them. Your first one, I think, was about having a group of super economists. I don't think we should have one team of wise people who represent all of us in the thinking, and that can't happen. You know, there's going to be lots of different political ideological reactions to all of this. We're going to have lots of different think tanks. We've got 4 existential risk organisations already, and no doubt there will be more. At the moment, there's the Leverhulme group, which basically is the 2 Oxford academics who produced that report, and that's pretty much it. You know, the IFS and other people, the RSA, do produce reports on automation every now and then. Lots of people have produced reports on automation, but nobody's total remit, permanent remit, is to think about these issues. And I think we need probably several, probably dozens of them, maybe dozens in each country. So I don't think there'll be one, I think there'll be lots, and I think that's a good thing. Your second thing about UBI being affordable, you can't just give people a poverty level income. You can't just give people a really, really basic income. If they've been doctors, if they've been truck drivers, earning well above the average and certainly well above the national minimum, they're going to be really, really angry if they suddenly get dropped to a very basic level of UBI. Now, you may not agree with that, that's what I think. And I think we can't afford that level of anger in society, because we are seeing what happens when you have people angry to a sort of, pretty modest extent, really. I mean, the cause for anger now in society isn't that great, and yet we have Mrs. May saying that the Labour is the new nasty party, but Amber Rudd turning them into the Nazi party. We have Trump, who's just extraordinary, and yet his followers don't care what he does. They don't care that he lies continuously. They don't care that he's ignorant. They don't care that he's rude and bigoted and malignant. They just don't care because they're so cross. Imagine how cross our society would be if lots and lots of people had had their incomes just halved. It's really dangerous. I don't think we can afford that. And I confess I've forgotten what your other 2 questions were.
Well, they were about the social disorder. I wouldn't agree with the doctors. Let's pass the microphone around.
Thank you for your talk. So there are a lot of initiatives at the moment about developing smart cities and initiatives on governmental levels. And that is probably one of the kind of first environments that would create our tax. However, the problem is that they cannot agree on a single platform. In one city or among different cities, among different governments, how do you think that will be overcome, and how do you think that the 6 tech giants that you've stated will, move to a sort of a single kind of tech zone that we can
I don't think they will, and it would be a horrible
Don't
world.
you think that competition will actually create a kind of a better economic situation for us, not to fear AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in competition. I'm a firm believer in having lots of different models competing, and I think different cities will take different approaches to becoming smart cities. Different countries, different groups within countries will take different approaches to all of these problems and every other problem. I think that's a good thing. One monolithic, top-down imposed solution is generally an utter disaster. My view.
Hi. Thank you very much for your talk. I agree with most of what you're saying. Certainly the vision is familiar. But I think it is mostly familiar, what you're saying, in terms of the way that we conceive of the problem. For me, it started a little bit back in your talk, when you started talking about peak human, as really what you meant was peak working human.
Yeah, peak human in the workplace. That's
Yeah,
a good point.
peak human in the workplace.
Distinction.
So I think that's the point where we might start to think about different scenarios and what it is that we're really talking about. For me, there'll be a huge shift, and a lot more positive, if we don't talk about basic income, but we talk about citizens' income. Because when we talk about citizens' income, we're immediately building in an idea of what human beings are going to be doing with their time. They're going to be have more time to think, to work together, to consider the quality of life, the quality of the society. This is really enough to keep us not only meaning and purpose-driven, but also possibly happy. So I think it's such a simple shift for me from basic income, which becomes this, this nightmare of employment, unemployment, how much money goes to a qualitative shift, citizens' income. We're actually looking forward to a more human-driven life.
Okay, well,
So this is not the future of work so much as the future of meaning, the future
Yeah.
of citizenship, the future of play.
yeah. Well, I hope I've conveyed the fact that I think that a world in which humans don't do jobs is a good world. I think humans will continue to work. Humans will continue to paint and draw and write books and write plays and stuff and do sports, even though there'll be machines which can do all of those things much better than we ever could. Just as people today get a lot of satisfaction out of painting a picture, even though they know there are many humans who will paint pictures much better than they ever could. Picasso didn't stop other people before he stopped producing decent paintings. When Picasso was a genius in his early years, he was just the most sublime painter. Other people didn't stop painting. They carried on painting, got a lot of fun out of it, even though they knew there was somebody who was much better than them. And I think that's the world we'll be in. Whatever you call it, you can't avoid the economic difficulty of making it happen. Just switching from calling it universal basic income to citizens' income doesn't make it more economically possible. We can't get to this world until we have the economy of radical abundance that Silicon Valley promises us. And I imagine that is coming. I believe that's coming, because frankly, if it isn't, we're all screwed. By which I mean an economy in which machines produce all the goods and services we need fantastically efficiently. So that you don't have to tax Google and Facebook all that much to pay for everybody else to have enough assets to buy the stuff. So I don't think it's doable now, and I don't think that calling it citizens' income instead of universal basic income will make it doable now. What we call it in the future, I'm perfectly happy to call it citizens' income. I'm happy with that.
But how to radiate it? You were saying you wanted to radiate from this room. It has to have some sort of a promising, creative,
Yes.
human vision.
Well, yes, there has to be a good news story. Absolutely. The chart I put up, which had the good scenarios and the bad scenarios, there has to be a compelling and plausible and sensible story, which we all get told in the 2020s. Otherwise, there will be panic. It'd be foolish for anybody to try to pretend that it's necessarily going to be a good outcome. I mean, I say foolish. Peter Diamandis and many other smarter people than me do believe that we'll just automatically get to this great new world. I don't think we'll automatically get there. I think there's plenty of opportunities for stumbles and social difficulties, as you were saying. But we do need a good news story that we can believe in. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi. You spoke at the beginning and mentioned effectively us becoming chimps. Yuval Harari talks about how the AI can own companies, is already owning companies, and will effectively own itself. Does that not make all the chat about UBI, etc., quite short-termist and a bit human-centric in a world where effectively we become irrelevant? The question being, why should the AI give us UBI?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've just finished Homo Deus. It's a fascinating book. I really strongly recommend people read it. The first half of it is annoying because it's slow and plodding in a way that Sapiens wasn't. He bangs on and on and on about vegetarianism, which is a noble and wonderful cause, but yeah, we've heard that. And then eventually he gets to the real point, which is fascinating, which is that neuroscience, and to some extent philosophy, has sort of demonstrated that free will doesn't exist, that we don't make the decisions we think we make. The conscious mind that we think we have is really actually just making up stories to explain what just happened all the time. And that algorithms are going to know us better than we know ourselves very quickly. So, for instance, you tell Siri that you're going on a diet for your New Year's resolution and you're not going to eat chocolate chip cookies anymore. 3 months later, when you should be going to the gym, you reach for the bag of chocolate chip cookies and your AI gives you a little electric shock saying, "Oi, a more valid version of you said you didn't want to do that, and I'm going to enforce that view." Then we've demolished personal identity. The algorithms are really running us, and we'd been mad not to obey their dictates because they're much cleverer than we are. So humans just dissolve. Now, if that happens, if Harari's right, then all of this is vaporware because it will be the machines that make all the decisions, and we don't have to worry about it because hopefully we'll all merge into one giant cosmic consciousness, and as I say, we don't have to worry about it. It becomes the problem of a far smarter being than us. He may be wrong. If he's wrong, we should worry about this. Okay, I look forward to seeing you in your tin hat.
Just kind of almost expanding slightly on that last point. Obviously, there's the far-off long-term scenario, but a lot of the kind of discussion about possible turbulence and problems in the short term seems to focus on the economic issue, when presumably there's a lot more questions as well when we have people trying to build systems now to predict whether any specific person is more likely to commit crimes, or whether we have the potential fairly soon for computers that can tell when someone is lying. That could, I feel, have quite a large impact. There's so many areas in which this would seem to like possibly produce things which would be just so radical in their impact on society. Is there almost like is the economic issue blinding people and stopping them asking other questions?
I actually think it's the other way around. You're quite right. Issues of privacy, issues of intrusion, algocracy, security, isolation, there are all sorts of issues which will be thrown up by the information revolution, and they're profound issues. I address some of them more or less in passing in the Economic Singularity. I've got some sort of slightly radical views about some of them. For instance, I think privacy is a dead duck. I think we're going to have to give up on privacy completely. But as Bill Clinton said, it's the economy stupid. If you get the economy wrong, then it doesn't matter what else goes wrong. You're really screwed. If we get the economy right, we live to fight another day and solve some of those problems. And at the moment, I think people are not paying enough attention to the possibility that we are going to hit a wall when it comes to the economy.
Well, you were talking about Siri and how it would become quite helpful and how people could have like serious discussions with it and stuff. But I mean, no offense, that kind of seems a bit sad, like talking to a phone about life in general. I mean, I don't really get how Siri or things like Siri are going to help us, because if, for example, someone's going through depression or loss or something, I mean, Siri's not going to be there to give them a hug or, give them advice. So
Okay.
what is AI going to help us? Also, quickly, how is losing jobs going to help people earn money and things like that? And shouldn't the world in general be spending money on global warming and keeping tigers alive and stuff like that, instead of computers and machines that are gonna ruin the world more?
Okay, I'm guessing you're Generation Z. So it's down to you to solve these sorts of questions. Now, is it sad for us to be talking to machines? I don't think it is. I was in a restaurant in Spain recently, and there was a family, and the parents were having a conversation, and the two kids were playing with Siri and talking to it and making it say silly things. And they were getting immense fun out of it. It was just a toy, really. But they were having fun, and the parents got to have the conversation that they wanted to have. I think it'll be a long time before we mistake machines for conscious entities. Probably will happen. And I think eventually the machines will become conscious entities. But in the meantime, when they're not conscious entities, I think people will know that they're not talking to a conscious entity, and they will have a different sort of conversation than they will have with other humans. So I don't see that as being sad. I don't see it as being psychologically a problem. And I think you'll be surprised in your life how valuable it is to have entities which are very, very smart but are not conscious. An example is there's a therapy system used by DARPA on soldiers, which have got soldiers who come back from battle who are psychologically very disturbed. They have something called post-traumatic stress disorder. And because they're soldiers and they're rough and tough, they don't want to admit that they've got post-traumatic stress disorder. And when they talk to human therapists, they talk a good game about how tough they are and how strong they are and how unaffected by the appalling things they've seen they are. And the humans are fooled, because the soldiers are good at selling this story. They have to sell that story to survive among their mates every day, so they're good at it. The machine, this therapeutic machine, sees through it, because the machine listens to what they say, and it takes on board what they say, but it also watches their facial expressions very, very minutely in a way that human therapists can't. And you can't hide your real feelings on your face in minute detail. And so the machine is better at working out the way a human is thinking than another human. That doesn't mean to say that the humans have been made irrelevant. It doesn't mean to say that the humans are alienated. It's just a very useful tool, and I think that's a good thing. As for climate change and other environmental issues, these are, like privacy and other issues, things that we have to solve. Personally, I think climate change will be solved by the arrival of non-fossil fuels. I think we're being slightly conned at the moment by people who say that solar power is cost-effective with fossil fuels. I don't think it is, but it will be. It will be. And I think that will probably take away a lot of the problem. But there may need to be other solutions. We may need to bury carbon in the ground or zap it up into space or something. But the thing is, if we don't get these things right, our societies will collapse. And then we won't be able to solve anything.
And Calum, do you think that what Demis Hassabis says is sensible, that the way we will solve all these other problems in part is by creating this artificial general intelligence which can help us solve them more comprehensively and more fully than we can do by ourselves?
Yes, I do. I think problems like climate change, like poverty, like war, they are, in a sense, they are engineering problems. There are solutions to them, and if we were smart enough, we would have solved them ourselves. So when we have a big brother, big sister, which is 1,000,000 times smarter than us, it can solve those problems for us.
Thank you very much. So I just want to go back again to this vision of humans being the second most intelligent being on the planet, and that the AI thinking it's the most important and wanting to be the most dominant. Do you see in your vision a possibility that AI can develop a morality and even diverge into two different moralities and end up battling against each other, and human beings being some sort of collateral damage in that?
Yes.
What does that look like then?
Ugly. Very ugly. Yes, that's clearly a possibility. There's a very nice observation by Ben Goertzel, who's one of the few AI researchers who would openly declare that he's working on artificial general intelligence. He says that we ought to really hurry up and develop superintelligence as fast as possible, because if we do, the first superintelligence will arrive at a time when the computing power and the data power and everything else that's needed to create it is really, really expensive. So there'll be 1, 2, or maybe 3 superintelligences, and it'd be much easier to control, not so much control, it'd be much easier to set them up to be benign and really like humans than if we kind of just wander gradually towards it and we create the first superintelligence when the raw materials needed to create it are cheap, and every schoolboy and girl can have one on their desk, and then we have millions of superintelligences. Some of those are bound to be malign. So I quite like the argument that we should hurry up and do these things so that we get 1 or 2, a singleton or 2, which we can better frame, we can better set them up positively. Is it possible that we could have a superintelligence which just decides humans are a bad lot, vermin, and decide to get rid of us, like Agent Smith in The Matrix? I don't think that's impossible. I don't see why that's impossible. Is it possible that we could create one which thinks humanity is marvelous and how wonderful it was of you to create me, thank you very much, and you're really interesting and I want to keep you around, and so I'm going to solve death for you, and I'm actually going to help you upload your brains into me, and we're all going to whiz off around the cosmos a bit like Kurzweil says. I think that's also possible, and that's what we should be working for.
So does it mean that if AI does become so super intelligent that it becomes so intelligent that it will see war as futile and not go physically a battle against one another, and be so intelligent, like diplomatically or something, that it wouldn't exist?
Yeah, I mean that's surely plausible. I mean, war is the failure of diplomacy, and we appear to be on a track. I mean, I don't believe in the Whig version of history where everything necessarily keeps getting better, because it clearly doesn't. Human history goes in cycles. But we seem to be on a long-term trend to reducing violence, and it's reasonable to think that an entity much smarter than us would seek to minimize violence, because that will get in the way of it achieving its goals, whatever they are.
Yeah, with your positive scenario, it seems to me to depend on 2 things. 1, we've got to get smarter, and 2, we've got to get better at working together. And I don't see in the world those two things necessarily operating in parallel. The smartest people are not necessarily the best at cooperating. People who are best at cooperating, not necessarily the smartest. And also I definitely do see a world, as you pointed out, where there's a lot of anger and division on both sides. So what are the kind of mechanisms that you see realistically being put in place beyond the think tanks and the talking shops that are going to get us better, particularly at cooperation, but also at maybe linking cooperation and intelligence?
Yeah, I don't think there are any. I don't think that we are going to get dramatically smarter in a time horizon that allows us to do that before this happens. I think we're going to have to muddle through pretty much as the species we are. We are getting a bit smarter. There's I think it's called the Flynn effect, that our IQ goes up by about 1 point every generation, and I see it in my kid. You know, that will carry on, but that doesn't move the dial. We're going to have to navigate these singularities pretty much as we are. But actually, I am less cynical about my own species than a lot of people are. I mean, a lot of people, I imagine probably a lot of people in this room, think that politicians are generally a bad lot, selfish and stupid. I don't think they are. I think politicians are usually pretty smart people. I think generally speaking, they don't go into politics to earn a lot of money because it doesn't pay that well. Yeah, they're all egotists, but frankly, we all are really, if we're honest with ourselves. And I think that, yeah, we have some appalling leaders, but we've got some good ones as well. So I'm reasonably optimistic that we can do it. It's a big challenge, but I think we're going to have to do it pretty much as the species we are.
But you think we can cooperate?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Our superpower is cooperation. It's because we can cooperate that we can bring a mammoth down, which could kill, you know, any 10 of us, just in terms of strength. We can, you know, the chimp, which is stronger than us, better weapons than us, is dependent on us for its future because we can cooperate.
Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is related to here.
Oh, hi.
Related to exactly that. Given that we have been a very belligerent species and all countries are competing, and on a scenario between the economic singularity based on narrow AI versus the super AI, a country get in between there first, could be China, could be other country, and they use that as a formidable weapon and a military advantage, and we move into a dictatorship. Are you optimistic or pessimistic on that scenario?
Well, firstly, as I said, I'm much less cynical about my species than a lot of people are. If you try to get any other creature that eats meat to have as many of its species in this room, you'd have a bloodbath. There's no other species which eats meat which can gather as many of its population in a room without killing each other. You know, chimpanzees can only gather in tribes of, I don't know what the number is, 10, 20 max, and they have to spend all day scratching each other and picking nits out of each other to reassure each other that they're not going to attack. You know, lions and wolves and so on, they can't move in large packs because they kill each other. We don't. You know, we could all probably kill each other in an hour or so. I imagine there'd only be 2 or 3 of us left standing, but we choose not to do it. I think that's pretty smart. I'm quite impressed with us. Yes, of course, if North Korea developed the first superintelligence, I think we'd probably be screwed. I don't think that's very likely to happen. They don't have the resources. I don't think that the Chinese are evil people. I don't think that they are necessarily less benign than the Americans. They've got different history, different culture, different approach to life, but they want pretty much the same things that we do. There's plenty of opportunities for us to screw this up, but I believe that we can make it work. And I think we will make it work if we decide to make it work.
Hello, first, congratulations on the talk. I have one comment and 2 questions. The first one, I think it's very interesting to notice that we're already living in a time where there's this new social media currency. More and more people are working out of passion, you know, to get shares and likes. And I think this is a trend that will carry on as we value more this type of currency against the normal money currency. And I think that will give meaning to a lot of people's works. People that do open source in coding, videos, music, I think that's the case. Now the 2 questions. Second, first question is, how do we exactly get the resources to implement a successful UBI scheme? maybe what should we cap the limit a person can earn and then distribute that excess wealth? Let's say that you get the richest people of the world and you cap that you limit their earnings to 50 million a year, and then the rest you distribute them. Like, I want to understand if someone's proposing like a serious actual plan in which we can get those resources. And second, the same with the implementation of solutions for AGI. I'm a believer and I'm a skeptic. I think that AGI can provide the strategies, but the strategies to solve world hunger, war, even medicine, it's ultimately a human decision. How can we actually implement those strategies that AGI might find?
Okay. How do we fund UBI? It's a really good question, and there hasn't been enough thought gone into it. In the short term, it's got to be tax. You know, where else could the money possibly come from? And who are going to be the rich people who are going to pay the tax? Probably the owners of the AI, plus the masters of the universe and Wall Street and you know, well-paid lawyers, etc., etc. Will they agree to pay vast amounts of tax? Well, interestingly, Bill Gates is trying to give away half his fortune. He keeps becoming the world's richest man again, so he's not doing a good job of it, but he is giving a lot of money away. Zuckerberg and his wife have put all their most of their assets into a trust, which they control, but it's a charitable trust, and they want to wipe out all the diseases in the world. Hooray, good for them. There seems to be a tremendously strong principle of philanthropy among the American tech plutocrats. So great, you know, maybe it's doable. One of the things that worries me a lot is that the money will not necessarily be earned in the countries where it needs to be spent. I've got an acquaintance, a friend, who reckons he's quite close to developing an AI system which will wipe out a small but significant chunk of the activity in the City of London. And he won't be living in London and he won't be living in the UK when he launches this thing, if he does launch it. You know, who knows whether he will. So somebody living in the Cayman Islands or the Seychelles or somewhere owns this system and is licensing this system to banks. All of the people who used to earn a lot of money doing the thing this system will do are out of a job, and all their tax receipts is gone. They're going to need an income. Their government's going to have to provide their income, but the revenue is being earned in a different country. We have to persuade that country to provide the revenue to this country. That's why I think that blank slide of the absence of European and African and South American AI giants, I think that could be a problem. How we introduce UBI is a really difficult challenge, and I don't have the answer. But I think that if we get some of our 7 billion brains working on the problem, rather than saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, it can't happen because we'll all have different types of jobs," I think we will find the answer. I'm really sorry, I'm getting quite old. My memory's not that good. You asked a question about AGI. What was the question again?
How do you implement the strategies AGI might produce to solve the...
Oh, would an AGI genuinely be able to solve all our problems? I think so. I think if you have an intelligence which is not just a bit smarter than Einstein, but 1,000,000 times smarter than Einstein, I think it will come up with sensible solutions. And I think we'd be mad not to accept its suggestions. I also think, though, and I haven't said this yet, I think that when we become like chimpanzees, the second smartest species on the planet, and when we're in the position where we know that, I think that would be quite debilitating emotionally for us. And I think we will have to upload. So I think the first job of the superintelligence, and I know this probably sounds like batshit lunacy to a lot of people, except that most of you in this room probably don't. Great. I think we will have to upload into the machines and join it and become part of its consciousness. Otherwise, we will probably expire out of existential despair by being, becoming ants, really.
Yes, hi. I find it despair, talking to a machine. If you are on the phone and you get the answering machine saying another 5 minutes, you get so upset. How can a computer, what the lady said here, trying to sort of calm you and then hug you, whatever? I totally disagree. I think that human contact is absolutely essential for our well-being, and I think you underestimate the social side of that challenge because you think you treat human beings as logical, whatever logic is. Look at Brexit. So it's not about it's all about economy stupid. People are driven by all sorts of ideas, temperament, whatever. So I don't think it's so easy to overcome that. And yeah, I'd like to believe that it's a great future, but we have to have global common goal to achieve it. The way the world is now, it's so fragmented, and where is greed?
Okay, can I answer? You've asked some interesting questions. So, your frustration with the phone system, I share. I experience it regularly, and the reason for that is that the machines just aren't bloody good enough yet, and they're getting better. One thing I didn't say enough probably is that although AI is 60 years old and it's become pretty bloody powerful, sorry, I mustn't swear, it's become quite powerful. It's only at the beginning. We are at the the exponential curve. We still, and we always will be, on that flat because the future will always be like that. So the machines aren't very good at the moment. They're getting a lot better, and they will become a lot less frustrating. Secondly, I don't think I ever said that I view humans as logical autonomous. I don't think we're all Spocks at all. I think we are an amazingly curious and mysterious and illogical mixture of emotions and drives and so on. And I don't think that's likely to change, and I don't denigrate it. I think we're rather a wonderful species. And then your third thing about the optimism of it. Firstly, imagine you wake up tomorrow and there's this being in existence which is 1,000 times smarter than you and me, and it talks to you and it likes you. That isn't necessarily horrible. That could be really, really wonderful. I mean, it's a bit like being a child again and having a parent who seems like a superhuman. That wasn't an uncomfortable feeling to look up at your mum and dad and think, these are seriously impressive beings. I want to be like them. I think that could be quite a good world. I don't think it'll last very long because I think as I said, I think we'll probably have to upload, otherwise we will die of existential despair. But in the short term, it could be quite fun.
So there's lots of people who've had their hands up. Only put your hands up if you can ask a question within 1 minute. And Calum, you'll have to answer within a minute. And then we might get around at least another 10 people.
You touched on the military use of AI. And it occurs to me that it represents an extreme power in a similar way to nuclear power. And the world has managed to control nuclear power for good, and also control nuclear power from a military point of view. Do you see the need for, and you see it happening, that we will have a similar global policing organisation to police AI?
No. We've not really managed the nuclear weapon threat. We've been very, very lucky. There have been 6 near misses. They should be called near hits rather than near misses. And it's just a matter of luck that we're still here. But autonomous weapons aren't like that unless you give them nukes. They're essentially an automated soldier. Can we and should we have a global organization to monitor, control, regulate automated soldiers? I don't think that will work, no. I don't think it's like landmines. I don't think it's like nukes. I think we will have automated soldiers fighting each other. But I think that could be a good thing, because A, they won't shoot civilians because they'll be better at distinguishing between civilians and soldiers. B, they won't have this astonishing need to rape. I don't know where soldiers get that from. I don't know why that happens. I've never been at war. But it happens a lot, and machines won't do that. And C, it's quite likely that a military commander who owns a certain amount of assets in the form of autonomous soldiers will know how many assets the other guy's got, or the other girl, and will say, I'm not going to fight that lot because I know I'll lose. It's a mechanistic equation, unlike with human soldiers. You know what the outcome's going to be, so maybe there'll be less war.
I'm intrigued by something you said earlier about UBI, where you keep kind of doctors getting a higher income necessarily than maybe a truck driver or
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Or that they would be very angry if you didn't do something like that. So I'm curious how you might envision social mobility and whatnot after you have a UBI. Like, would you end up with kind of just a fixing of the social hierarchy?
Great question. I've thought about this a lot. I went on a walk around Hampstead with my partner, Julia, and we were looking at these wonderful houses in Hampstead and just thinking, so we get to the jobless world, and some people live in Hampstead and some people live in Lewisham. I shouldn't be rude about Lewisham, Peckham. I imagine Peckham's probably quite nice these days, isn't it? Last time I was in Peckham, it was really dangerous. But anyway, you know, when the music stops and everybody's on UBI, some people will be living in gorgeous mansions in Hampstead or in penthouses on Fifth Avenue, and other people will be living in horrible tenement blocks in let's not say Peckham, but Peckham. Does everybody just stay where they are, or is there any kind of mobility? I have no idea. I don't know how that works. You know, do you say, right, the mansions in Hampstead, nobody's allowed to live in them because they're too nice, so they become museums? I don't know. We set the robots off to improve the housing stock for a start. That happens, but you know, that's going to take a while. It's a fascinating question. We haven't begun to think about this yet.
Hi, my name's Ed Gregg. I'm from Deloitte Digital. Actually, there was a Deloitte report that was discussed in the House of Lords back in April, prepared by our economists. Unfortunately, they are, Ian Stewart, our chief economist, is of the view that we will generate more jobs. The report
they all
was,
are. Yeah, I read it.
Entitled The Great Job Creating Machine. And I've tried to convince him otherwise, but it's a long, slow process.
You're going to have to shoot him, I'm afraid. They're irredeemable.
Yeah, okay. I'll look into that. I'll add that to my to-do list for Monday. So in that, actually, in the House of Lords discussion, it mentioned William Lee, who was
William Lee, thank you. Yes,
who was refused the patent by Elizabeth I.
Exactly.
The point that I was going to, I'm encouraged that they're discussing it. It's a shame that they were discussing a report in that way, but lots of the Lords did talk about automation and what they view as still the threat of automation, unfortunately. But are you encouraged by John McDonnell's announced that he is going to be looking at UBI within the Labour Party? Are you encouraged? You said that you feel it's too early, but are you encouraged that they are discussing UBI within the Labour Party at the moment?
I think
you're not encouraged by
that? No, not in the least. I think he's doing it for all the wrong reasons. He's misdiagnosing the wrong problem. But that's my political bias. You know, I think John McDonnell is, and I apologise, there's lots of people here who vote for him probably, but I think John McDonnell is a rather nasty individual and a fool. No, I'm not encouraged by that. I think that is a big red herring and can lead us down the wrong path. An awful lot of people are going to hear UBI and think John McDonnell, Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, and they're going to think, well, that's obviously rubbish, and they're right. But then they're not going to take the next step and think, well, yeah, but in the future it won't be rubbish, it'll be necessary because the situation will change. So I think it's actually negative.
Hi, I just wanted to pose another question. If we, as you said, we were the smartest species on the planet, isn't that not quite true in the sense that we have been a small window of opportunity, or a small window when we've been the smartest, but didn't we in most of man's history have gods? And won't this future AI be sort of similar to that? And there's a religious need for a god or something else, and isn't that a connected...
Okay, so I said I'm an equal opportunity offender, I'm going to do it again. I think religion's a disease which we're on the way to curing, except for some reason in America. I don't think that we are creating a god. A god, by definition, as I understand it, is something which is supernatural. You can't explain it by the laws of physics. That's not what AI is, even if it's god-like. You know, I think we have an opportunity to become god-like, but we're not going to become gods unless we live in a simulation, and that's a whole other story. We will be explicable by the laws of physics.
Hi there. So Stephen Fuller, you might know his proactionary principle, and he's kind of put forward the idea that a future human is more morally valuable than a modern human, in the same way a modern human is more morally valuable than a monkey. And therefore, you know, using the logics of advanced capitalism, sees this economic singularity as a possibility to exploit the resource of humans to more quickly move us to the technological singularity by basically experimenting on them, and they've got nothing else to do because they're fodder economically. So that's kind of the inevitable moral endpoint of advanced capitalism and the logics of capitalism. Should we not be thinking, I know you're against moving to the UBI right now, but should we not be moving towards a more positive kind of socially conscious cultural dynamic right now? Because this is happening in 20 years, and if we carry on with this economic system until then, the logics that we have in place, and this is coming into being, are extremely dangerous.
Like I said to the lady who... I don't think we're going to be able to change ourselves in the time frame to make when this happens. We're going to have to muddle through this as the species, as the creatures that we are. There's one of the things that a lot of people talk about when they think about automation is, we need to change the education system, and if we educate everybody really well, then we can turn truck drivers into computer programmers. A, that's not going to work for most truck drivers, just isn't going to work, and that's not being patronizing, that's just a fact. And B, people are always saying, education is the solution. Education is never the solution because it was you, wasn't it? Education is never the solution because you can't change it that quickly. Actually, education needs to be revolutionized, it really does. We get it very badly wrong, but it's not going to change that much in the next 20 years. Well, actually, sorry, it is going to change quite a lot, but not enough to make us different, not enough to change our culture or anything. And Steve's idea that we're morally superior to monkeys and the future human is morally superior to us, I think that's quite obnoxious, actually.
If I could just return to the fact that we're talking about the economic singularity, and all economics is about distributing limited resources. Do you see a role of an AGI or an AI at some kind of think tank, supranational level to actually create a post-capitalist, non-socialist system that actually distributes resources? That's the first question. But the second question, this is one that is very often avoided and not even asked, is how do you, having separated, let's just say, production to the AI, AGI side of things, and consumption to the human side of things, therefore enabling all the things that one can do creatively, and even allowing battles and quarrels and things like that as long as they're contained. Once you've separated that, you then come to the issue of how to actually contain and not indefinitely replicating demand by having some kind of population control. Is that going to be one of the big decisions that the AGI, AI supranational?
Okay. In answer to your questions, respectively, yes and no. So will we use AIs to help us figure out the solutions to these problems? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do already. AIs do a lot of decision making in society now, and they'll do more and more as they get better and better. It'd be crazy not to use them. Be a long time before they have the final decision on anything important, but we will use them increasingly. Secondly, do we need to control population? No, I don't think we do. Since Malthus got it so badly wrong, and Ricardo got it so badly wrong, we've learned that we can produce resources, we can produce the things we need more and more efficiently, and we're not going to stop doing that. We're going to continue to get more efficient. We're probably going to be less demanding on physical resources as we spend more time in virtual reality. And if Musk gets his way, and I really, really hope he does, and we have a colony of substantial numbers on Mars, we'll ship people out there. There's a lot of real estate in this galaxy.
Anybody who hasn't asked a question yet wants to chip in with a question of 1 minute at most?
Thank you. All the lenses through which we're discussing these forthcoming changes seems to me are sort of nice little face masks that we put up in front of enormously complex systems. So nation states, money, economy, shareholder capitalism. These are very simple things that we can throw about in a conversation and think we know what they mean, but they're actually immense boiling vortices of complexity which we can't handle. So we're looking to imagine a future which is significantly recursively affected by some deep level changes, by playing with no masks that cover up, the Japanese kabuki theatre stuff, that cover up enormous levels of complexity. So, and what we're trying to do, and what you say we have to do, and which I believe, is, as humanity, manage these changes. So, can we do that without getting to be better humans? And you're very unoptimistic about that.
Well, I don't think we have an alternative.
You don't think we can enhance ourselves by various meditation practices or various drugs or various personal smartphone assistants or even reprogramming some of our genetics so that we're...
No, that's a fair point, and I have probably underplayed the amount that we can enhance ourselves with the new technologies that we already have. Now, mea culpa, I'll buy that, but I don't think it's really going to move the dial, to be honest. I think this stuff is going to happen in 20 to 40 years if I'm right. I could be wrong, but if it does, I don't think we're going to be dramatically different human beings.
In that case, you've terrified me rather than
Well, okay, because it sounds like you're quite pessimistic about your species. I'm not. I think that we are quite impressive.
I actually disagree with you.
Because you think we can engineer ourselves to improve a bit?
I think
quite a lot.
We can do things like invent new metaphysics that actually leverage the poor brains that we've got. And we've done that many times through history, and we've become exponentially smarter ourselves by inventing new metaphysics several times over. Descartes changed the game. Yeah. Jung changed the game, and Freud between them, even though nothing they said is true. It enabled us to think about human beings in a radically new way, changed civilization. Well, I think we can do that, and we must do that.
Fair enough, but we've got 25 years to do it.
Start tomorrow.
Good luck.
Personally, myself, I think they're obviously not going to think like us or share our values, and I'm fine with that. Would you say a viable option would be to basically take human agency out of the equation, go full bore for the technological singularity, bring the AI, make sure we get a benign despotism, live under its rule, spread across the universe? Would you agree?
Well, I don't really think we have a choice about when it happens, when the technological singularity happens. I think it will happen if it can happen, and it will happen as soon as it can happen, because the incentive to make one is so enormous. So, you know, people like Ben Goertzel can say, let's step on the gas, but it doesn't make any difference. It'll happen when it happens.
So you don't mind if companies cut corners in their quality control or their safety checking in order to get there faster?
They will.
Shouldn't we be putting rules in place or partnerships between great companies in place to make sure that more and more people are thinking about not cutting corners because of the drawbacks involved, or is that just going to be red tape that ambitious business people cast aside in a hurry?
If you think that a Mandarin in Whitehall can control what's going on in DeepMind, then good luck.
And maybe the people in DeepMind can control what's going on in DeepMind.
And they will. You know, the people in DeepMind, and there's some of them here, are, you know, they're people. They're the same mix as the rest of us of good and bad and happy and sad, and they're moral beings, and they will do what they believe is right, just as we all do.
We're almost out of time. I'm going to just make one quick announcement, which is that some of these same topics will be discussed at a meeting at Imperial College on Tuesday, which kindly the Imperial College Beyond Society have asked me to come and speak at. They asked me to speak about robots are going to steal all your jobs, and what I should say to students who are thinking that they might have their jobs taken from them. And so that's on Tuesday evening. You can find that on my Twitter feed or on my Facebook. It's nominally for students from London, so if you consider yourself a student, you're welcome to come, I guess, so long as there's room in there. That's a new society that's been set at Imperial College, so I'm pleased at that. There are more London Futurist events coming up on similar topics as well. I mentioned already the Transpolitica 2016 event. Transpolitica means sort of what is for politics the same as transhumanism is for humanism. It seeks to go beyond, to anticipate the better politics of tomorrow and try and bring the better elements of tomorrow's politics forward more quickly if that's possible. So that's the point of that conference, and we're looking at tangible and practical policy changes that might make a difference. And at least 3 of the people who've asked questions here today, Alex and Tony and Dean, will be speaking at there with short presentations, making proposals along various lines. If you haven't signed up for that, I would urge you to do so. The first 90 registrations are at a certain level. I think it's £15 for the whole day. If you after the first 90, it goes up to £20, so we can cover some more refreshments. So that's some of the things that are ahead. I think there's a couple of hands that have been very insistent. Let me give a quick chance for some very short final comments.
One of the first things I heard about AI was via Sam Harris, who gave the example of if you created an AI which was to be the best spam filter in the world, it may kill everybody on the planet because then it would do its job. The title of today was about optimism. So could you give an opposite to that, to give me an optimistic view as opposed to his pessimistic view?
So Sam's recent TED talk was kind of a year out of date. It was odd. He didn't mention MIRI and FLI and FHI and CSER at all. We are addressing that issue. It's a really big problem, how to make the first superintelligence friendly. It's a really big problem, but we are addressing it. We've got a few decades probably to get it right. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about that one. The one that scares me is the economic singularity, because I don't think we're thinking about it.
And some people say we shouldn't bother thinking about the economic singularity because the technological singularity is going to sweep everything aside anyway. What do you think of that?
Oh, if the technological singularity happens in the next 20 years, then yeah, we don't have to worry about the economic singularity because we'll have the bigger problem.
But this requires a much deeper level of intelligence than this.
Yeah, yeah.
These computers don't need to be generally intelligent. They just need to have a bit of common sense. And
this is narrow AI, and that's AGI.
And because we can't foresee the future, as many people have said, although we should try very hard to paint different scenarios and explore different scenarios, and the more we do it, the better we'll get at it, and the better we'll gradually come to terms with the complexity. This is indeed a challenge which deserves lots of people's attention. So, Calum, you've led us through that discussion.
Can I, before you close, there's some people here from DeepMind, and
I think they said they liked DeepMind, or they heard from DeepMind.
Oh,
Does anybody want to admit that you actually work from DeepMind?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought somebody said they were.
Anybody want to? I don't think I recognise anybody from DeepMind here. Yeah. Not that I know all 250 employees. Maybe you can, if you want to talk in the pub, that's a good thing to do. Yes. So if you want to bring forward something in the pub that you weren't confident to do in front of the whole audience, in front of the camera, in front of the future AIs who are studying this video to figure out which of us should be exterminated and which of us should be uploaded, then do so in the pub. But I think we should thank Calum, and I recommend both of his books, and I think this is definitely helping the conversation go in a direction it very badly needs to go. Thank you, Calum.